I never had much reason to glance at the abandoned building that sat right next to the female dorm. It was a crumbling structure, worn by years of neglect, surrounded by yellow caution tape that had long since lost its meaning. But then there was Jasmine. She lived in the dorm closest to that forsaken place, and from the moment I laid eyes on her, I was hooked. Jasmine had this aura about her, beautiful, mysterious, always just out of reach. Maybe that's why I was drawn to the idea of exploring the building, to impress her, or maybe just to get closer to her. It wasn't long before my roommate, Chris, caught wind of my little infatuation. He, like me, was always down for an adventure, and the idea of poking around in that decrepit building, well, that was just his kind of thrill. "Come on, Will," Chris nudged me, smirking as we passed by Jasmine one morning. "You've been talking about her for weeks. This could be your shot. Girls dig haunted stuff, right?" It was a bad idea, and I knew it. The campus had long since cordoned off that old dorm, claiming it was a hazard due to mold and structural damage. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to believe that this might actually be a chance to impress her. At worst, she'd think it was just a dumb joke, and at best, maybe I'd get a date. That afternoon, I took the plunge. I walked up to her in the courtyard and said, "Hey, Jasmine, right?" She looked up, her green eyes cutting through the autumn light. "Yeah, Will, right? From bio." "That's me," I smiled, hands in my pockets, trying to act casual. "So, I was talking with my roommate and we were thinking of checking out that old building next to your dorm. You know, the one that looks like it's about to fall over. Anyway, I thought you might want to join." Her brow furrowed. "The abandoned dorm? You know that place is locked up, right?" "Mostly," I said with a grin, "but we found a way in. Thought it'd be kind of fun." To my surprise, she didn't laugh me off. "What's the worst that could happen, right?" she asked. And that's how Chris, Jasmine, and I found ourselves sneaking into that creepy, decaying dorm late one afternoon just before sunset. True to what I'd heard, all the main entrances were sealed, but Chris had found an underground access door that was already broken. It led into what looked like an old laundry room, thick with the smell of mildew and dust. We didn't get far before the eeriness set in. The lights in the hallway, dim and ancient, flickered like they hadn't been replaced in decades. The hum of electricity buzzed faintly, but it was barely enough to pierce the heavy silence. "Why do they even still have the power running in here?" Jasmine asked, her voice unnaturally loud in the hollow corridor. "Who knows?" Chris replied. "Maybe the campus never bothered to shut it off completely." We continued down the hall, our footsteps echoing in the stale air. The deeper we went, the worse the smell got. It was like a rot, like something festering just beneath the surface. We rounded a corner, and that's when we saw it. A circle of dead birds, cardinals, their red feathers stark against the peeling linoleum floor. They weren't just dead, though. Their heads had been cleanly removed and meticulously placed in the center of the circle. But where their heads used to be was blood, and its dark, wet pool was fresh. Jasmine gasped, covering her mouth. "My God." Chris and I exchanged glances, the chill running up my spine unmistakable. I wanted to say something, to reassure her, but no words came. The air was thick with a feeling I couldn't quite place, but I knew one thing was for certain. We shouldn't be here. "We should get out of here," Jasmine whispered, her eyes wide and frightened. We didn't argue. As much as Chris liked to put on the tough guy act, he wasn't an idiot. And me? I was too rattled to think clearly. We hurried back the way we came, barely talking, our earlier excitement drained by the gruesome discovery. Back outside, Jasmine was pale, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "That was messed up," she said, shaking her head. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," Chris said, uncharacteristically serious. "But maybe we shouldn't have been in there." I was about to agree, ready to call it quits for good, when Jasmine surprised me yet again. "I kinda want to go back." Chris raised an eyebrow, and I stared at her. "What?" After that, she nodded, her expression conflicted. "I don't know, there was just something about that place, like there's more to it. I just want to know what's going on." Chris looked at me with that familiar gleam in his eye. I guess we're going back after dark." Later that night, we met outside Jasmine's dorm. The campus was quiet, most people tucked away in their rooms or out partying, the perfect cover for our return. This time, the atmosphere was different. The night swallowed us whole as we made our way back to the broken door. There was no excitement, no anticipation, only a heavy, oppressive sense of dread. Inside, flickering lights seemed worse, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. We retraced our steps to where we'd found the cardinals earlier, but when we got there, the birds were gone. No blood, no feathers, nothing. "The hell?" Chris muttered, his voice strained. "It was right here." "Someone's messing with us," Jasmine said, her voice shaking. "It has to be." That's when Chris pointed to the floor. Will, you see that?" Muddy boot prints. Faint, but unmistakable, leading away from where the circle of birds had been. Those prints didn't belong to any of us, and they weren't there the last time we were here either. "What do we do?" Jasmine asked, glancing nervously around the hallway. I was about to answer when Chris froze, his flashlight trained on something further down the hall. "Oh man, you're gonna want to see this." I followed his gaze, and my stomach turned. The air was damp, and as we moved further into the building, the walls looked wrong. Thick, black mold oozed from the cracks in the plaster, climbing like vines up the decaying structure. That wasn't the worst of it. Lying in the corner of the room, half covered by debris, was a body. It wasn't fresh. The flesh had started to decay, sunken eyes staring into nothing. The skin, bloated and pale, was covered in patches of black mold, blending with the ruined walls around it. But what stuck with me, more than the smell or the sight, was the realization that this was once a person, someone who had been left here to rot. Jasmine gagged, turning away, barely able to hold back her scream. Chris was the first to speak, his voice trembling. "We need to get out of here. Now." As if on cue, a sound echoed through the hall. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, getting closer with every beat. I didn't wait. None of us did. We ran, back through the dark corridors, the flickering lights casting our shadows in twisted shapes against the walls. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could hear Jasmine breathing heavily behind me, Chris just ahead, leading the way. The footsteps didn't stop. They followed, growing louder, getting closer, getting faster. We burst through the underground door, sprinting across the courtyard until we collapsed in a heap of breathless fear near the edge of the campus. Only then, in the relative safety of the open air, did we stop to look back. I thought I caught a glimpse of what looked like the silhouette of a man outside the dorm, staring at me with deep yellow eyes, but the others didn't see it. No one was following us. The building loomed in the distance, silent and still, as if it had swallowed up all the horror within. For a long time, none of us spoke. Jasmine leaned against a tree, her face pale and her hands trembling. Chris sat beside me, staring at the ground, uncharacteristically quiet. "We're not going back," I finally said, breaking the silence. Chris nodded, agreed. Jasmine didn't say anything. She just looked at me, her green eyes wide, haunted. We never spoke about what we saw after that night. Not really. It was as if the experience had welded us together, a dark secret we all shared, but none of us wanted to acknowledge. Sometimes I'd catch Chris looking toward the old building, with a mix of curiosity and fear. Jasmine, who lived in the dorm next to that old building, transferred schools the next semester. But to be honest, I don't blame her. And while I never told anyone about what we found, I think about it often. There were rumors, of course, students whispering about the abandoned dorm, spinning ghost stories and urban legends. Some even claimed to have seen strange figures in the windows late at night. But no one ever went back. At least, not that I know of. The campus eventually destroyed the building. I read about it in an email one morning. Something about structural hazards and black mold. They didn't mention the birds, and they didn't mention the body. Thank you for staying until the end of the show. I appreciate you giving me some of your time, and I look forward to seeing you again. If you can tell me what you thought of today's episode, that would help me so I know what things to give you more of. And if you want to hear more of my voice, then tune in next week for a new episode, or go back and catch the last one. I'll be doing my best to post once a week on YouTube and Spotify, so let me know if you like this stuff, and I'll keep making more of it. But until then, I hope I gave you chills, excitement, or a fright. Thank you for listening, and to all, a good night.